All right, welcome to The Explainer. So the AI boom is, well, it's everywhere, right? Companies are posting these incredible, mind-blowing earnings. But there's a catch. Some of the sharpest financial minds in the world are starting to ask a very, very uncomfortable question. And that question is this. What if this whole AI boom, all these massive profits, what if it's all built on a simple accounting trick? I know, it sounds a little crazy, but the idea is that this whole thing might be standing on some pretty shaky ground. So, yeah, let's get into it. And it's not just anyone asking this. That right there, that's a quote from Michael Burry. Yep, that Michael Burry, the guy from The Big Short. And when he talks, people tend to listen. He's pointing a finger at what he sees as a huge potential problem in how these tech giants are doing their books, specifically when it comes to all that expensive AI hardware. Okay, so to really unpack this potential trillion-dollar puzzle, we have to start with one kind of boring but absolutely critical accounting idea. And that idea is depreciation.
And don't worry, we're not going to get lost in the weeds here. All you need to know is this. Depreciation is just how a company accounts for the fact that stuff gets old. You know, you buy a new server, you buy a car, it's not worth the same amount a year later, right? It loses value. Depreciation is just how they put that on the books.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. On paper, a lot of companies use what's called a straight line method. The value just kind of goes down nice and steady, year after year. Super simple. But that's not how the real world works, is it? Especially with tech. In reality, value plummets. It's like driving a new car off the lot. Bam, it loses a huge chunk of its value instantly. And for technology, that drop is even more dramatic.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, the company making all the chips. He basically says that as soon as their new chip comes out, you couldn't give away the old one. And these new generations are coming out every single year. So the key takeaway here is just how insanely fast this hardware becomes obsolete.
All right, so how does all this depreciation talk connect to the big players? I'm talking about Google, Microsoft, Meta, the hyperscalers, the companies that are really running the whole show.
Well, these guys are spending an absolutely staggering amount of money on AI gear. Morgan Stanley thinks their depreciation costs alone, just the cost from their stuff getting old, will hit $680 billion over the next 4 years. That's a number that's hard to even wrap your head around. And you better believe how they account for that has a massive, massive impact on their profits.
So, here's the kicker. Just when this hardware is getting outdated faster than ever before, what are these companies doing on paper? The exact opposite. They're actually extending the useful life of their servers. Microsoft and Google went from 4 years to 6. It just doesn't add up.
And this isn't just some small accounting detail. This is the whole game. In 2023, Google was able to boost its earnings by $3 billion. How? Not by selling more stuff, just by changing this one number in a spreadsheet. It's like a magic trick for profits, completely disconnected from the reality of that hardware losing its value. But you can only kick the can down the road for so long, right? The bill is coming due. Morgan Stanley predicts that by 2029, these delayed costs are just going to explode. For companies like Oracle and Meta, depreciation is going to be a massive chunk of their total expenses. It really throws a wrench in the whole AI makes us more profitable story. And hey, if things look a little dicey for the big guys, for the companies that only do AI, it looks downright scary. And when we talk about pure play AI, there's no bigger name out there and maybe no more concerning example than the company at the very heart of this revolution, OpenAI. I mean, just look at that number, over $80 billion. That's what OpenAI is facing this year alone in bills and commitments to its suppliers. It's just a wall of money they owe. The scale is unbelievable. Which leads to the obvious question, how in the world does a company that's making about $20 billion in revenue even begin to pay for that? Remember, they don't have a giant search engine or a cloud business to back them up like Google and Microsoft do. This is a huge, huge problem. And this chart really lays the problem bare. You see that gap? That's the difference between what it costs them to run the thing and what they're making. That cost of inference is basically just the electricity and computing power needed every time you or I type a question into ChatGPT. And as you can see, that cost is way, way higher than the money they're bringing in. And it gets even murkier. When you actually break down their revenue numbers, a lot of analysts are getting suspicious. They think a huge chunk of that claimed revenue isn't even coming from real customers. The theory is that it's basically just cash being shuffled over from their biggest partner, Microsoft, just to keep the lights on. You know what? Let's just be generous. Let's say their revenue numbers are totally real. The problem is still there. In fact, it's getting worse. The best case scenario is that they lose $8 billion in 2025. That's up from $5 billion in 2024. The hole isn't getting smaller, it's getting bigger, and it's getting bigger fast.
So, what does all this mean? It points to something really strange, a fundamental paradox that's sitting right at the heart of the AI economy.
Think about most tech. The bigger it gets, the cheaper each individual thing becomes, right? It's called economies of scale. But with AI, it seems to be the opposite. To make the models better and smarter, you need way more computing power. And more computing power means every single question you ask it costs more to answer. So improving the tech actually makes the economics worse, not better. It's completely backward.
So the bigger and better these AI models get, the further away from actually making a profit they seem to become. And OpenAI is the poster child for this. Their revenue is growing, sure, but their losses are growing even faster.
And this really brings it all home. Remember when Sam Altman said ads would be a last resort? Well, guess what's coming to ChatGPT? Ads. It's a pretty clear sign that the product as it is just isn't valuable enough for people to pay what it truly costs to run. So they're forced to find other ways to make money.
Which leaves us with one final and absolutely crucial question for this entire industry. If making AI better also makes it more expensive to run, then who's actually winning here? Who captures the real value? Is it the companies like OpenAI that are building these amazing models? Or is it companies selling all the shovels in this gold rush, like Nvidia? That right there is the trillion-dollar question.